Now, my own personal story, which I'll close with tonight, I'd like to just see a show of hands. Have any of you ever had that experience where you had a desire to want to go back to maybe the place where you were born or where you grew up or where you bought your first house? You know, kind of a natural instinct, isn't it? Well, that's a story I'm going to share with you tonight. Because the first house that I bought was a little two-story bungalow in the Finger Lakes area of upstate New York. And I was a single fellow. And when you get your first house, you move in and you don't have a lot of furniture and, you know, it's kind of empty in there. So I did what people normally do. I had to go out and get myself a little furry friend. And it turns out some folks that my folks knew through the church had just had a whole litter of little German Shepherd pups. And so they told me about it, and I went up and I visited them. And the run of the litter, oh, he is a cute little bugger. I just fell in love with him immediately. I picked him up and I put him in my car and I drove him down to my parents' house and I let him out of the car. And the first thing the little guy did is run over to the fire plug between the sidewalk and the street and lifted his leg. And I said, well, he's already figured that part of life out. Well, I was happy. My parents were happy for me. So we got back in the car, and I lived in a little community a few miles north, about 300 people total. And this little town, it had not seen the explosive growth that many of the other cities had. It was still a little rural community for all intents and purposes. And when, by the time I got there, by the way, I'd stopped at a hamburger joint to grab some lunch, and I discovered my little guy liked hamburgers. And so I grew up with Popeye the Sailor. What do you think I named my dog? Wimpy. I'd gladly pay a Tuesday for a hamburger today, and he loved hamburgers. So I got home, I opened the door and let Wimpy out of the car, and Wimpy ran out to the front yard, and he's sniffing and looking all over the place. What the hell? There was no fire hydrant. Well, the little community, we didn't have a municipal water system. We were all on well and septic systems, and there was no fire hydrant. And he came back to me with this sad look in his eye, like, what am I going to do? So I realized he'd grown up in the suburbs, and he had learned the suburban ways. But eventually he figured out that a tree or bush would do the job, but I felt bad for him. At the time, as it turned out, I worked for a company that manufactured municipal valves, water systems for cities and towns. And that included fire hydrants. Kennedy valve fire hydrants, you still see them throughout the neighborhood here, were one of the things that we made. And I worked in the office, but I was out in the shop all the time. And on one of my visits, I was talking to a fellow in the machine shop. I said, I know from time to time you must, mess up, doing something on one of the lathes or mills. What do you do with the pieces that you screw up? Oh, we just take them and throw them in a big bin out back. I said, well, what do they do with it then? He said, oh, after the bin gets full, we take it back over to the foundry, we melt them down, and we start all over again. I said, hey, do you think anybody would notice if I took a couple pieces out of that bin? He said, oh, no, we use them for boat anchors and all kinds of stuff. Help yourself. So over the course of the next couple of weeks, I found all of the pieces that you see above the ground for a regulation Kennedy Valve Classic fire hydrant. And I took it home. I was just so proud, and I poured myself a little concrete pad, and I had it all painted up regulation colors. And there it was, right smack dab in my front yard. And I got to tell you, Wimpy was one happy puppy when he saw that thing. Now, I was also, if you're in a small town, anybody here in a small town grew up volunteer fire person? Well, I was a volunteer fireman in Bellport. And all the guys at the fire hall, we had a laugh about Jim's fake fire hydrant. Well, that was, the laugh for a while, and then it kind of subsided. And as things happened, my career evolved. And I ended up taking a job out of state, and I packed up everything, put it in a truck, and moved to my new location. And I'd kind of forgotten about that little red bungalow, the nice little town that it was. But about 30 years went by, and I'm on Facebook. And I get this Facebook message from a person I had no idea that they'd reached out to me. And so we started a message exchange. He said, "You're the guy that owned that little red 2-story bungalow on Main Street?" I said, "Yeah, I guess so." He said, "You aren't very popular around here." I'm thinking, what did I do? I mean, I wasn't a pillar of the community, but I certainly wasn't, a nuisance. He said, "Well, that damn fire hydrant of yours." And then I realized, okay, I'd moved and I left that hydrant there. Well, it turns out about 10 or 15 years after I moved, the city got a grant and they put in a municipal water system with real pipes. And on the other side of the road, every few hundred feet, there was a real live fire hydrant that was connected to a main. Well, as it turned out, apparently they had a fire not too far down the road from where I lived. And the volunteer crew that showed up for it did what firemen are trained to do. And you've probably seen this in movies, but not paid too much attention. On the back of the truck, you got a couple of firemen. And one of them, when they're approaching the scene of the fire, he takes that flat 2-inch and he jumps off the truck and he wraps it around the nearest fire hydrant. It's called catching the hydrant. And the truck just goes down the road playing off all the hose. Guess what fire hydrant they attached themselves to? My fake fire hydrant. The fire hydrant comes out of the ground, concrete pad and all, starts bouncing down the middle of New York State Route 14. The crew wasn't happy. The fire chief, who I never met, was not happy. And the people whose house was on fire, they weren't happy. So I guess the lesson in all of this, and every good story should have a lesson, is one should never underestimate the unintended consequences of what you thought was a good deed, because sometimes good deeds don't exactly turn out the way you expected them to. Thank you.